Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center. My name is Oleksa. It's been 10 years of the war, and today is day 638 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian occupiers. And I want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about our heroic resistance. Today we have invited you to discuss an important topic. Today we will have the presentation of two books dedicated to the horrible tragedy of our people, dedicated to genocide of Ukrainian people, specifically Holodomor. So we're presenting two books today, Desert Holodomor Ukrainian South and Gimme Mom Some Nom Nom, Holodomor Dictionary. Let me introduce the speakers today. Joining us are Shevchenko, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine for European Integration. Ihor Stepurin, founder of Summit Book Publishing House, head of the Library Country Charitable Foundation and the head of this project, and Maksym Udovychenko, head of the Center for Protection of the Information Space of Ukraine State Enterprise. And also joining us online are the authors of today's books. It's Oleksa Riznykiv, the author of Give Me Mom Some Nom Nom, Holodomor Dictionary, and Vera Marushchak, author of the book Desert Holodomor Ukrainian South. So every year on the fourth Saturday of November, we honor the memory of the victims of Holodomor of the years 32-33 and the mass man-made famines of years 1921, 1922 and 1946, 1947. This year, this day falls on the 25th of November, and on that day we will honor the victims of those atrocities. So first I would like to give the floor to Mr. Taras, so he tells us how important are such projects, how do they help us to reestablish the historic justice. Good afternoon. Obviously the memory is important, honoring the memory is important every year, and specifically on the 90th year of this tragedy. So in terms of information activities, it was a traditional bid for a book to reinforce the national unity, and in our announcement we were saying that among those books we would like to see on the contest, we would like to see the books on Holodomor. There was a number of projects. We have two winners, the books we are talking about today. And I think that the most important will be to hear from the authors of these books. So just in brief, I would like to name those books once again and their authors. So first, Desert, Holodomor Ukrainian South, authored by Vera Marushchak. This book, the editor, the publisher of this book is a creative agency Artil. And the second book, Give Me Mom Some Nom Nom, Holodomor Dictionary, issued and published by private entrepreneur Stepurin and authored by Oleksa Riznykiv. I'm happy to see everybody present here at this event, as well as the representative of the state enterprise, the Center for Protection of the Information Space, who was directly in charge of this project implementation. So once again, let me tell you that preserving the memory in all forms, including the printed word, is incredibly important. It's a small drop to reinforce the Ukrainian identity, to preserve the national memory, and still this drop is important. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ihor. You are the manager of this project, so let's start with you. Why specifically this topic? How did you come up with this idea? And obviously about the importance of such work in our Ukrainian market, and not only Ukrainian, in international as well. We see that the topic of Holodomor is becoming increasingly interesting for our international partners. It's just now that we have this rhythm, we maintain it, to have our international partners to recognize all those tragedies as genocide. Thank you, Ms. Olga. I would like to thank the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy for support of those projects. Today we present two books. First one, as Mr. Taras mentioned, Give Me Mom Some Nom Nom, the Holodomor Dictionary. So let me tell you about my personal story, how I found out about this book. I was preparing to an international conference in Prague. So I've come to the National Library of Ukraine, named after Yaroslav the Wise. So I've taken this book, a small book. It's called Maksym of 33rd, authored by Oleksa Riznykiv. And when I was preparing to that conference, I had a dream to publish this book, the Dictionary of Holodomor. I was deeply impressed by it. Dry facts that really impress you a lot. Mr. Oleksa collected a number of facts that are very important to discuss in 21st century. And after 20 years, we present this completely different, well, not completely different, but a new book by Mr. Oleksa Riznykiv, and I hope he will tell us more in detail about this book today. It's very interesting. It was added with a lot of new the new stories, maybe let's put it like this. And once again, this book, as we were publishing it, on the first page you can see, well, on the cover of this book, it's a very important work dated 1933. It's a work of Victor Tsimbal. The first picture that was dedicated to Holodomor. It was painted in 1933 in Argentina, where he was residing. And this picture was handed over to the National Museum of Holodomor and Genocide. And again, thanks to Oleksa Riznykiv, we have this cover today. We have this picture on the cover of this book. And talking about another work, it's completely different. It's completely different, but not necessarily less important. It's a work of art, very emotional, like real touching. I think that Vera Marushchak, who is the head of the Writers' Union of Mykolaiv region, Mr. Dmitro Drozdovsky, made me meet her, and she sent me the manuscript of this book, Desert Holodomor Ukrainian South, and I was impressed by it deeply. I'm from Kherson, from the south myself, and it was a taboo topic in our family. Neither my grandfather nor my grandmother ever told me about Holodomor, and only then I found out that the first child of my grandmother died at the age of 2 in 1933. She never told me about it, so it was a taboo to talk about it. And after I read this book, it was submitted to the contest of the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy as well, and the commission that was speaking the books unanimously voted for these two projects that we are presenting today. I think it's very extremely important because these books are going to the front lines, they're going to the military units, to the libraries of the military units. And they are quite easy to read, but we understand that the war and the destruction, eradication of Ukrainian nation has not started in 2022, but it started way before this full-scale invasion. So once again, I want to thank the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy. I want to thank the Center for Protection of Information Space of Ukraine for the great job they're doing in this area, and us as publishers, that they support us as a publishers, and we will continue publishing books like this because I think it's really important. Now, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction of our authors, Mr. Oleksa, Miss Vera. Mr. Igor has introduced you already, so let's talk a little bit about the books. Mr. Oleksa, let's start with yours one. Can you please tell us a little bit about how it was written and what the readers are about to see there? What is the window? Mr. Oleksa, we're hearing you. We're hoping you're hearing us too. So am I starting? Alright, because I've misheard it a little bit. So good afternoon to all of the participants. I'm real happy to see the new edition of my book. It was first published in 2004, and it's called The Messing of 33. It has a very interesting story. My mother, since her childhood, she was saying, son, pick the bread crumbles from the table and eat them. If a bread falls on the floor, pick it up, kiss it, and eat it. It was a normal thing for me. This is the way I was educated from my early childhood by my mom. And all the time she was saying, you don't know what was going on in the year 1933, what was going on back then. People were even eating each other, they were eating everything. She survived it. She was born in 1908, and she survived that horror. And in the years 1988, 89, Gorbachev's perestroika had begun. The books about Holodomor started being published. Even the Central Committee of Communist Party issued one book that I was very curious about. I've read through all of it. This book, The Black Book of Holodomor, written by Yavorivsky, right in front of you. Well, you can see it now. But look how thick it is. Who's gonna read it? That's why I started thinking what I can do about it, what I can do about Holodomor, what can I figure out. So I think that it was a revelation coming on to me. Like, I wanted to find out what people were eating back then in those times. And in the book of Kovalenko I found, well, you know, Kovalenko, it's a great book, a thick book, a wonderful thick book about Holodomor. They published it in 1989, so this book was laid as a foundation for my book. So I decided to pick everything that people were eating. I was looking for the people who were telling those stories, so it could be clearly seen what the food was, how they were finding this food, how they were cooking that food. They were writing about hedgehogs. One guy was saying, my mother was so fat, you know, and I found a hedgehog in the field. I've drained a fat from it, and I gave it to my mother, so she drinks it. And and in the morning she wakes up very thin, and we see that there was a lot of water drained from her in the morning. So this is how I fed my mother, with a hedgehog. So I've decided to make a dictionary where I demonstrate from A to Z all of the dishes. So I found 296 such names of the dishes. I remember that story when people were finding some, for example, a leather belt in an attic. So they were boiling that leather belt for half a day, and then they were drinking that water, and then they were eating that belt cut in pieces. They were finding sparrow nests and any other nests. The boys were saying, I climb up a tree, I find a couple of small birds that I've eaten alive. That's horror. And that horror was after me just as long as I was working on that book. Valery Ilya, in his magazine Osnova, he published a list of the dishes, of types of food that were eaten during Holodomor. Unfortunately, he passed away. So it's 296 names in total. And I have to recognize it. I was thinking, if there is yet another famine, God forbid the communists come again, God forbid Moscow comes again, that imposed that Holodomor, my book could help somebody. So people check out what can be eaten and what cannot. because there were cases when people were eating something for the first time after they were feeling hunger, like even the bread. And so after people stay hungry for a long period and then they eat a lot of bread, that woman just died. So it tells us that you can't eat a lot after you spend a lot of time without eating. So this is how I've put together all those stories. I've printed them on a typing machine, and in year 90 I was resting in Irpin, where I met Lyudmila Ovdyenko, a wonderful poet. She told me she was the editor-in-chief of a local newspaper in Poltava region, and she told me she had a computer and she wanted to print everything on computers. She did it, and she sent over all that book to me. It's an interesting story, and then we started thinking about how to publish this book. So I went to Sergei Kivalov, a philosophy doctor in justice. He was not like he is now back then. He took this book and he said, my parents survived Holodomor too, but in a week I got a call with the request to write a pre-word, an introduction to the book. So I'm coming to his legal academy, I sit at the desk, and within 20 minutes I write that introduction, and the name, I was bold enough to write it, that yes, it was genocide. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if he supports me, because it was back then that Verkhovna Rada voted unanimously to recognize Holodomor as genocide. So I've decided that it was the merit of Kivalov. I gave him this introduction, and in a week I get a call from Publish House Legal Literature, and they tell me, we're going to publish your book. Do you have an electronic version? I'm saying yes, I do, and I'm sending that version that was sent to me by Lyudmila Ovdyenko. They copy it and they publish a book. And the printout was 1,000 copies, and I told them it's a very small number, let me pay you so you print more. I paid them 500 hryvnias and they printed out 500 more copies. So it was printed out in 1,500 copies. And now, thanks to the ministry, I want to thank Mr. Taras, Mr. Ihor, thank you for taking my book. I think that it's something that very, very clearly describes the genocidal policy conducted by Moscow against Ukraine, starting with Bogdan Khmelnytsky, as Taras Shevchenko described him in his verses. However, this genocide was going on for 300 years. The best people were dying. I analyzed the Ukrainian roots. I have more than 65 roots of the Ukrainian surnames, and they are, among them are people executed by Stalin during the early 30s. Check out those names: Les Kurbas, Mikhailo Hrushevsky, who was poisoned, the Union of Savulu, where there was a court proceedings in Kharkiv where 10 people were convicted to death. Best people of Ukrainian nation were executed. They were killed. Mr. Oleksa, let me... So again, this book will be of help to us to demonstrate to the whole Europe that genocide is going on not only today, that they want to eradicate Ukraine, Ukrainian people, Ukrainian language, so that this genocide is going on for 300 years, and this book can clearly demonstrate it to the West that this genocide is going on still. And I want to thank our Western partners for all of their support, for their help in our fight against Moscovian despotism. Thank you very much, Mr. Oleksa. On behalf of all of our team, we would like to thank you for your great work. Miss Vera, I'm hoping you're hearing us. We would like to give the floor to you so you tell us a little bit about your work. Good afternoon. Thank you. Are you hearing us? Yes, we're hearing and seeing you clearly. Wonderful. So first and foremost, I would like to thank everybody who put an effort in this project, because it's real important and urgent, and it will help our descendants to pay attention to those terrible pages of our history that our country went through. And I would like, through the word of art, people to find out about this tragedy. Maybe it will be better remembered by the boys and girls and the adults, because it's less and less of those people who can say that they either remember Holodomor or they know something about it. I remember that I was being educated based on the literature, on the word of art, and I was perceiving the world through the word of art, not only through Ukrainian artists, but also through Theodore Dreiser, Jack London, Mark Twain, Daniel Defoe, and many other writers that I can name today, because the word of art is something that helped you to perceive the world not only in Ukraine, but the world around us generally. When I was a young journalist, I came to the editorial Southern Pravda, and I asked to write the material about a person who survived Holodomor. And looking me straight in the eye, my colleague told me we had no Holodomor. And I was real surprised, I was real stressed. How come it didn't happen? My family, my mother survived it. In Ukraine, you couldn't find a family that would not have survived Holodomor, that famine. And when I made that remark, he kept denying it, but then he said, Vera, you're a very young journalist. You don't know that we have censorship, and censorship is not going to let this thing through. You cannot talk about Holodomor. You're not allowed to. And of course I was right, and my mother was telling me a lot about it, but very, very cautiously. For example, I haven't heard a lot of such stories from my father or from my grandmother, either of my grandmothers, because they were just afraid to tell me about that. And when I was hearing such stories told, I was understanding it can become a work of art. And this is when I was taking a feather in my hand, and I was keeping my stories somewhere in a hideout so they don't end up in the wrong hands. And this collection of stories, Desert Holodomor Ukrainian South, is something that I start with the story of a dry bread. This is what I'm holding in my hand, this piece of dry bread that could save a life of a human being. And I think that all those who decide to read this book will find out a lot through emotions of the protagonists. It's a story that is called The Desert. It's about the life of my mother. She's a real hero. There's a lot written about Holodomor there, about grandmother trying to save her kids, took them to Odessa, and the communists, they were destroying the whole villages, and people were not led from the villages to the cities because there was no Holodomor in Odessa. And when my grandmother brought her children to put them in a shelter in Odessa, but she really didn't want to do it, she just hid them somewhere in the orchard, and the people saw them. They saw the 100 children. They gave them something to eat, and they started picking my grandmother's children, my aunts. She jumped out of those orchards and she started crying and telling about Holodomor all around. So she was promised to be supported, to be helped, so that she doesn't come to all of the kids for the next time, just with the one, because it was 4 of them in total. My mother was the eldest and the rest of them were younger. And this is how they got just something to eat. My grandfather, he had already his legs swelling of hunger, just like Mr. Oleksa said, that after a long period of hunger, people cannot eat a lot of food safely. So my grandmother was feeding my grandfather piece by piece, and this is how he survived. There's a lot of such stories. They were intertwined with one another, with the war. A lot of losses of our Ukrainians are in the aftermath, because we were under the heel of Moscow all the time. We've survived through horrible pages of our history. Thank you very much, Miss Vera. Thank you for the great job you've done. We hope that this book will gather a broad audience. So, Mr. Maksym, let's proceed to your reflections about this project and these books. I'm happy that thanks to the ministry, thanks to our authors, quite quickly these books will end up in the hands of many Ukrainians. I personally have already read both of them, and I can say that if we talk about the Holodomor Dictionary, even after the beginning of the full-scale invasion and all those emotions that we have, everything we experienced, still there are some moments in this book that I was deeply impressed and even shocked with. Talking about Desert Holodomor, I can recommend this book not only to the adults but also to the children, because it's written in such an easy language, and many protagonists of those novels are the children too. So please ask Mr. Taras, and we will have you provided with these books. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dear colleagues, I would like to invite you to our conversation, ask your questions or give your comments. Good afternoon, Alena Sapko, Ukrinform. Just a couple of details. What is the printout of both books? Mr. Ihor, you've mentioned that you are about to send them to the libraries of the military units, so are they going to be available for sale? Or are they? And yet another question: are both these books planned to be printed and in English language to reach out to the broadest audience possible? Thank you for the question. Really, translation is very important. This is what we work on. We want to have it translated into English language because it is important. Talking about the printout, thanks to this program, the printout is 1,000 copies. and the organizations that are in demand of these books, they submit their request to the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, and through the Center of Protection of Information Space of Ukraine, we hand over these books for the free access. Unfortunately, the library program is a program that is being exercised by the Ukrainian Institute of the Book. This is why these books mostly end up in military units, they end up in humanitarian centers. So the libraries, it's a little bit different program. Talking about additional copies, I think we'll solve this problem in coordination with the ministry and the Center for Protection of Information Space. We will make an additional print because it's important to have this book in the bookstores, and with the support of Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, we can decrease the cost of this book, because 1,000 is already procured by the ministry, and the commercial print will be available, and I think that is the right way to go. This is exactly what we're supposed to do, to cooperate with the ministry in this. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you got an answer to your question. If anybody has any more comments, you're welcome. Please take the microphone, because well, my family survived a number of Holodomors during the Russian totalitarian regime rule, and now the researchers are being lost in numbers. What was the number of victims of Holodomor? Famous Soviet professors, they say the number of 3 million. Famous Professor Volodymyr Sergeychuk proves that the number may reach up to 10 millions, and there are reasons to say so, which he tries to prove in his books. So I'm curious, what is your opinion in this regard? Is it the question to the authors? Well, whoever is ready. Well, let me say a couple of words here. Yes, Miss Vera? So Mykolaiv region, my mother was telling me that under every fence there was a lot of dead bodies. She said all of our streets were dead, and that was the example of one village only, and there was a number of such villages. I think that the number is way bigger, and no one can tell today, because the totalitarian regime was doing everything to silence it, not to tell everybody, to remove all of the witnesses of Holodomor who would be able to tell about those who unfortunately have not lived to our days. For example, right here, there is a book in Germany. It's translated into German language, Vasily Barka, The Yellow King, about those horrible, real terrible times of our history that our Ukrainian nation survived. So again, the figure is real big, and no one can answer how big it is. And regarding the number, let me tell you, Dovzhenko was saying it's 10 million, and the ambassador in Denmark was writing to his government, the ambassador of Denmark, he was saying 14 million. So this figure has to be double checked. When whole villages were shut down, the people were not let either in or out of the village, with no food being brought there, and everything was taken away from the people. In my book, I'm telling about it. They were pulling the porridge right from the oven. They pull it from the oven and they drop it on the ground, stomping it. So yes, the figure is immense. Now we would have had maybe 100 million of Ukrainians. This is what they're previous witnesses were saying that we could have had 100 million of Ukrainians now if it's not for Holodomors. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Oleksa. Well, I was spending a lot of time in the Vinnytsia region at my grandmother's house, and they were saying there was a lot of dead people back in Holodomor, and this is where I first heard the stories of Holodomor from my grandmother. So talking about the number, we have the Museum of Holodomor as a part of the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, and the matter of total number is ambiguous, and we have to, along with the scientists, to continue working together on identifying the number. It was genocide, no matter if it was 4 or 5 or 10 million of people, it's genocide all the way, and it's important to have this position supported on national and international level. Yes, search for truth is important. Sometimes it happens so that some figures are not quite well researched, that they're not well justified or reasoned, and we are accused about trying to exaggerate. So we have to take all those discussions on figures cautiously, because for us it's important not to lose the international support in one matter, that Holodomor is the genocide one way or another. Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation. Thank you for implementing this important project. Once again, I would like to remind all of our spectators and listeners that on the 25th of November, we commemorate the victims of a terrible genocide of Ukrainian people. Let's remember this, and the least thing that we can do is to remember to tell our kids about that, and let's not forget that we have to light the candles on this night to honor the memory of those who were unable to survive this terrible tragedy. Thank you. We want to thank all of the security and defense forces. Let's continue working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.